folks, Stuart Warren here. I'm going to teach you how to tie Quigley's double bead spey. This is a fly that sits pretty close to my heart. Bob Quigley was a good mentor of mine and a great friend of mine. And we really had kind of a loss in the fly fishing world when he passed away. This is a fly that I actually was lucky enough to help Bob develop back in the day. We were fishing a lot together and tying a lot together. And originally this fly was tied with Rhea, so you could substitute Rhea for the marabou if you want. I'm going to use ostrich today. Most of the ostriches you can find, like any of the Montana Fly Company's ostrich, is really, really similar to that Rhea. And it's a little easier to work with. Rather than having to tie in the feather, you can just tie in a couple of different pieces of the plume. And I'm going to try to mimic these same colors. You know, Bob always used to say, you know, there's one fly color combination you can use and it has all the colors in it. So this one's got a little bit of chartreuse, a lot of chartreuse. It's got a little bit of blue in there. It's got a little purple, a little black, and it's got the bead on the front. Now, Quigley does claim to be the guy who invented the egg-sucking leech. He says he worked on it for the Dean River. I've talked to a couple folks who agree with him and a couple who don't. So we're going to do it my style today. So it's going to be a little different than the one you see here on the Vise, but this is a kind of a fun fly to tie. So we'll get rid of that guy. You're going to start off with one of these OPST steelhead shanks, and these guys are the longer ones. It's like a 44 or 2 inch, excuse me. And you're going to go ahead and take your pink bead, thread that on first with the small hole towards the front. And then you're going to take another bead, and I'm using the little 1/4 inch black bead from the Ashton Fly Shop here. These guys are great. I love them. And that pink bead's a 1/4 inch one as well. Any 1/4 inch hot bead will work. And then you're going to thread that second bead on there too, hence the name, the double bead spey. And then go ahead and secure that to your vise. I have this little nice tool that works for tubes and for these shanks. And leave yourself some space on that shank. This is a longer fly. And just push both those beads to the front as much as they will. And I'm using a size 2 Gamakatsu octopus hook. And then once again, I put a little piece of tape on the end of that hook point so I don't hook myself while tying the fly, and the hook is debarbed as well. And I'm going to use a black thread. I'm using a size 70 denier from Dansville. It's a great little thread here. And I'm going to start that thread up right where the beads are. And I'm just going to wrap that back towards the end of the shank. Try to get a nice thread base down. This is what's going to hold in our trailing hook. And if you wanted to get a little more depth out of this fly, you could substitute that black bead for a cone. Just add a little more weight to it. 2 beads on there, it's probably going to be heavy enough for whatever you need it to do. Okay, and then I'm going to take my trailing hook, tie that in with the hook point facing up. And with this one, I'm going to try to give myself enough space so that I can swap the hook out if I need to. So it's about the length of your hook plus just a little bit. So something like right there. And this is a great fly for the road, great fly for the coast, BC, and they just eat this thing pretty much everywhere. I've used it on the OP. I've caught the biggest fish I've ever hooked was on this fly. Did not land that fish, but it wasn't the fly's fault. And just wrap all that forward. Keep kind of pulling the firewire on top of the fly so it doesn't get wrapped around it. And I'm going to stop my wraps kind of where I want my first bead, that black bead, to sit. So somewhere about right in there. And that's going to give us this little space here to tie in the front section of the fly. And then I'm going to double back. Actually, one little trick I learned from Bob is I'm going to take these firewires and I'm actually going to wrap it around the shank a couple times to give myself just a little bit of a bump. That will help keep that bead in place. And then you can bring it back up to the top and do a couple securing wraps and then tie it backwards on itself as well. And I'm just going to bring those guys all the way back. And And then cut them nice and short. Where's my razor scissors? These razor scissors are great for cutting this firewire. This stuff is difficult to cut. All right, now for the first move, I'm gonna make myself a dubbing loop here. So just basically I'm just gonna pull a length of thread, put my finger in the middle of it, wrap up back to the shank and do a couple wraps here. And then I'm gonna take that thread and wrap it around my loop 3 times, then back into the shank, a couple securing wraps, and bring that forward about 1/4 of an inch. And I'm gonna use some of this ice dub chartreuse. I'm gonna make just a little dubbing ball here towards the back. So give yourself a good pinch of it. And I'm just gonna stick that right in my dubbing loop. Take my dubbing spinner here. And I'm just gonna give it a good spin while clamping down on that loop until it starts to spin, and then just let it kind of go. And I'm just gonna give that one more spin, get it nice and tight. And with the ice dub, it has lots of these long kind of scraggly pieces, so I'm just gonna take my fingers and kind of twist it and make them behave themselves. And give it one more spin. Don't spin it too much, especially with that 70 deniers, it will break. And I'm just gonna palmer that. You can do a couple wraps to get started here. And I'm gonna wrap it kind of on itself for the first couple times because I'm trying to build a little bit of a bulky knob, if you will. And that knob's gonna help kind of keep my ostrich out. And now I'm gonna take chartreuse ostrich, really kind of fun. And I'm just gonna cut, let's see, let's find a good length here. Somewhere about that length would be fine. And I'm gonna cut 4 off there. And I'm just gonna tie those in to the, kind of the top and on my side. And it doesn't matter how they splay out in the water, they're gonna just sit back there and dance around. Or as Bob used to say, swim like a monkey. And I'm gonna cut 4 more here, or 5, or 3, or whatever. It doesn't need to be 4. And tie those in too. And I'm gonna try and tie those in about the same length as the first ones. And these ones are kind of on the top, your side, to kind of spread them out. And then I'm just gonna take about 4 more. And I'm just gonna flip my vise over since it's a rotary, and I'm just gonna tie those straight on the bottom. And try and tie them in about the same length as the other guys. And you can go ahead and just tie those guys in for a little ways here to about where we made that bump with the firewire. And I'm gonna trim those guys nice and short. These will get covered up with some dubbing, so they don't need to be perfect. Okay, I'm gonna come back to my ostrich. And I'm going to use just a little chartreuse saddle. This one's kind of almost lime green, but chartreuse would be just fine. And go ahead and pull off the base of those feathers. And we're going to use this as kind of just a little prop in front of that. So we want a little bit wider of a piece of a feather, you know, usually towards the base. Clean that up. Pull off more of this webbing so it doesn't get in my way. And go ahead and tie that feather in. And pull those fibers back and kind of sandwich them and just hold them back as you palmer. And if they start to get bound up, just pull them out again and keep working those fibers back as you palmer forward. I like to do 3 securing wraps and a couple wraps around the shank just to kind of hold everything in place. All right, at this point, you can use kind of whatever color dubbing you want. You could use just a silver braid if you want, but I'm gonna use some of this ice dub in lavender. I really like this kind of lavendery color. It's just kind of a different color than you see. So I'm once again making a dubbing loop, and I'm gonna make this one pretty long because we're gonna wrap this all the way forward to those beads, and it's also gonna hold those beads in place. And this is UV also, which I really, really like the UV these days, especially for winter steelhead. And I'm just gonna stack these little pinches of this ice dub in my dubbing loop. You can see how I'm doing this. I'm just gonna kind of work it back up, and I'm just gonna create kind of a longer dubbing loop that I can use to wrap the body of this fly. Like so. And then take your dubbing spinner, put that in there. And then this is your opportunity to kind of take a look at how you've stacked it in there. You don't want to have any spots that are real thick. If you do, just kind of adjust it so that it's a little more even. And then I'm going to pinch at the base of that dubbing loop and give it a good spin and let that just go wild. And once in a while, your ostriches will be fussy. And if they continue, what you can do is just take a little bit of water and wet those guys. And that'll kind of keep them behaving themselves in the back there. Okay, and then just go ahead and dub forward from there. Right to where we stopped our firewire. Go ahead and just tie that off. Okay, and we're gonna go ahead and clean this up now so that that bead will sit back right onto what your head's gonna be, because we're gonna tie this off. So I'm gonna give it a half hitch, and then a whip finish. And part of the reason why I really was crucial or instructive about putting that small hole forward on your bead is so that the big hole towards the back, and that that bead will sit over the top of the little head we just made. You can kind of force it on there. It's not gonna be perfect, but we just want it to stay there. And go ahead and put a little bit of hard head on that whip finish. Like so. Okay, now for the second portion of our fly. I'm gonna push that bead back and give yourself a little bit of space to work here. Of course, the beads don't want to behave themselves, but just go ahead and tie your thread in between those beads. You can just start wrapping on itself again here. If you're having a hard time with that front bead, you can just tilt your fly forward a little bit and it'll keep that bead out of your way. And this black bead's gonna act as kind of our little bit of a shoulder, so it'll keep things kind of tied in nice and, or kind of bulked up. And the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take a piece of purple guinea, and I'm gonna take a longer one and just clean up the base of the feather, pull all that webbing stuff off. And we're gonna use a real long one here. This is gonna act as kind of our prop for our marabou and our ostrich. Clean up the tip, cut it nice and short. Go ahead and tie that guy in. And we're just gonna pull those fibers back and kind of sandwich them at the same time and palmer it forward. And it doesn't matter if these fibers are really kind of raucous, because it's gonna be underneath some marabou. But it's gonna act as just a little bit of a prop for that marabou, so that it doesn't die in the fast water. And what I mean by die in the fast water, sometimes marabou, when it gets into really fast water, has a tendency just to lay down nice and flat and stop swimming. What we really want to do is kind of hold its structure so that it keeps swimming when that marabou hits the fast water and it doesn't have any structure, it just lays really flat and almost looks like a worm, which may not be a bad thing, but I like my fly to swim. Okay, now we're going to take a piece of black marabou, and I like one with a real long webby stuff on the tip top there, and then some of the webbier fibers towards the bottom as well. And I'm just going to clean up about half of the feather down. I'm going to work back up to the tip. I'm just going to pull these fibers towards the base of the feather and clip off some of these shorter ones, and also give myself a place to wrap in that marabou. So you see I've got just a little bit of a tag here that will be easy to tie in. You might have to do kind of a loose wrap at first, and then you can go ahead and wrap it nice and tight. And just go ahead and pull those fibers back as you're palmering it, just like you did with that hackle. And go ahead and tie it off once you're done. And remember, marabou is really fragile, so tie in a little bit more than you want to stay. Your first couple of times fishing with it, it'll keep that bulk, but over the many outings you have with it, it's going to start to kind of fall off. So I like to tie it in a little bit bulky. Clip that stem nice and short. Now I'm going to use some of this barred purple ostrich. And we're going to do the same thing we did with that chartreuse ostrich. I'm going to take about 4 feathers, 4 fibers, 4 hurls, whatever you want to call them. Trim those off. I'm going to tie those in on the top, kind of on my side of the top. I'm going to do the same on the top and on your side. So originally this fly was tied with rhea, like I said, and they just couldn't produce it with rhea, so we started playing around with more of the ostriches and some of the marabous, and we chose to go with the original one with just the marabou. So it was a little easier to tie production-wise. But if you're sitting there tying flies, it's not like you're in a big hurry necessarily, unless you're a guide like me and you need to tie them fast. And don't worry about trimming those. We're going to come back and trim them here in a second. Just keep tying them in. I'm going to use 4 more on my side on the bottom and repeat 4 more on your side on the bottom. Kind of tying them in that almost like a square pattern so that they're even around the fly. So you want them just to kind of lay out there kind of even. And go ahead and give them a couple securing wraps, and then we're going to trim these nice and short. Just be careful not to trim your actual ostriches off, which I have many, many times. And then I'm going to take my thread and I'm just going to clean up all those loose ends that we just trimmed, just to make it look nice and neat. Okay, it's looking good. Now I'm going to take a little bit of water and I'm just going to pull all this stuff back and out of the way, because we're going to tie in a little bit of flash here and a couple hackle tips. So you can see it holds everything nice and neat, so it's not going to be in the way when we're doing our final touches here. Okay, flash. Pearl crystal flash. I'm going to cut about 3 or 4 of these guys. And I'm going to cut them real long, almost the full length, in fact. We're going to tie them in and then pull them back, almost like we did with the ostrich, but I'll show you kind of a cool trick. So take it about the halfway mark, so about yay, and tie those in on the top. And grab the loose ends and pull them up nice and tight so it's on top there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold these around the base of the fly. I'm going to tie them off at the bottom so that we have these crystal flashes on the top and on the bottom of the fly as well. And if they're being a little bit fussy, you can just turn your fly overboard and retie them in there too so it spreads them out. What you should end up with is kind of just a well-dispersed crystal flash hackle almost, if you will. And I'm going to take a couple strands of this electric blue Flashaboo. And by a couple I mean 3 because I like the number 3. Cut those guys nice and long. And this is kind of like our wing, if you will, so tie them on the top of the fly. I'm going to leave them long and I'll trim the back ends to match for length. And cut those guys off. And I'm going to cut these just a little bit longer than my hook. All right in there. And then instead of using Lady Amherst, like the original one, I'm going to tie in a couple hackle fiber or feathers. These are these nice grizzly barred feathers from Metz. And so I'm going to kind of put these two together almost in a sandwich, like so. And I'm going to measure the length. What I want with the length is I want these guys to be just a little bit longer than, say, like these back ostriches. About right in there. And I'm going to keep that length pinched, and I'm going to take it in my other hand, and I'm just going to pull those fibers back. And that's going to clean up where I'm going to tie in the fibers, or the feathers, and then it's also going to mark my length. Just clean those up really well. And give yourself a lot of space here, as I'm going to show you how to fold these back on themselves to keep them secured. A lot of times if you just tie them in without folding the stem back on itself, it'll just fall out during some of your aggressive Spey casting moments, which we all have. And then I'm going to switch hands again with them, and I'm just going to make sure that that sandwich is still there, because this is going to be kind of my wing. And it looks like it's still good to go, so switching hands again. Going to hold that down towards the shank, and I'm going to give it a loose wrap first. And then I'm going to tighten up as I come around the top, and a little tighter wrap. And a little tighter wrap. And you'll see that'll keep those hackles in place. And go ahead and clean that up really well. And then I'm going to take these two long stems that I left, and I'm going to fold it back on itself. And that's going to really secure those in. And I'm going to tie those in just like that. And now don't let go of those stems, because once you let go, it's really hard to trim them. So I'm going to keep those still in my hand. Oh, I lost them. So if you do lose them, go ahead and just pull back all your materials that you want to keep on there, and just slide your scissors in behind them, pull them out, grab them in your fingers, and trim those guys nice and short, like so. And that'll keep those hackle fibers in there really well. Okay, now at this point, if you're happy with your fly, you can just go ahead and whip finish it and be done with it. I'm going to put one more guinea hackle in the front to give it a little bit of a collar. It'll also just clean up that head if you had a little bit messy of a head. And same thing, I'm just going to clean up the base of the feather, pull off all that webby stuff. Then grab it by the tip, pull back. We don't need a lot here, so you don't plan on using the full feather. I'm just going to use about that much of it. I'm going to trip off the tip. Go ahead and tie that guy in. And I'm going to palmer that around. And one probably just 2 wraps with that guinea, and we want to make sure that these guinea fibers behave themselves. So when they start acting up, just grab them and pull them back. If the unpalmer, do it. It's worth your time here, and just pull those back again. Hold them in place as you palmer forward, like so. And that puts a nice clean finish on that fly. Also provides it with just a little bit more structure. And I'm going to give these a few wraps. And trim that nice and short. All right, that's pretty much it for as far as materials go on this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a half hitch. And then a whip finish. Okay. Now here's a step that Quigley taught me that you may or may not want to do. It's up to you. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt. But a lot of times with these painted beads, when you run them into the rock, it'll kind of chip them off. So what we started doing was just taking a little bit of our hard head, and I'm going to use the hard head brush here. Actually, before we could do that, let's just put a little bit of hard head on our thread and make sure that we don't have that come undone. So just work that right in there along the bead. But what we're going to do is we're going to take this hard head with the brush and go ahead and knock some of it off there, just like you're painting your house. And we're just going to apply that hard head straight on to that bright bead. And that's just going to give it a little extra layer. So when you do run it into those rocks, which is inevitable, it'll have just a little bit of protection to it. Now just be careful with the hard head. It takes a little bit of, a little time for it to dry. And if you touch it with your fingers, it'll turn white before it dries. So just let that sit. You can take it off your vise if you like. And what I like to do with these kind of flies is I'll just take them and I'll hang them, like so. But there you have it, Quigley's double bead spey.